You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast. Today's episode will be a part of our People Leader series, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at and what they really do every day. Hope you enjoy. Tracy, welcome to the Modern People Leader. How you doing?
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's been a busy week for me and Steven. We got into New York I guess you got here Monday. Steven got here Monday, I got here Tuesday, and then we leave Thursday. So it's been like an action-packed 48 hours, but yeah, we're excited to have you on the show. We start every episode the exact same way, and that's with good news stories. We like for our guests to go first. So if you have something, feel free to jump in, but if not, we're happy to jump in.
Fantastic. Yeah. My good news story is it's springtime. It's my favorite time of the year. And I had an Eastern Phoebe bird choose to nest on my front porch this year. And I got to watch the whole process from her building the nest to last week. The 4 babies actually flew the nest. And I saw this happen when I was walking to the mailbox, and I got a little emotional about it. I'm not going to lie. I'm asking myself, why am I so emotional about these birds? But it's a bit of a metaphor in my own life as I have teenagers about to fly the nest. So I think it really hit me as a beautiful moment and an emotional moment.
That's beautiful. Do you want me to go next, Steven?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is, as I alluded to, this is a very busy week. So I'm in New York till Thursday. I fly back home Thursday morning, so tomorrow morning. And then Friday morning, my wife and I fly to Miami. We're doing a joint 30th birthday party trip, just us two. And we haven't taken a trip, just the two of us, in probably like 2 or 3 years. So I'm really excited. Gonna have a lot of good food, get some beach time, get some spa time in. But yeah, it should be, I think we have a fun weekend ahead of us.
That's awesome. I love Miami.
Me too. It's such a great birthday place. It's where I had my 30th birthday.
Probably a little bit different type of 30th birthday.
Yeah. This was 2006. So yeah, it was very different. Very different. So my good news, we were in New York, like Daniel said, and this is the first time I've been in the city since post-COVID. I lived here for 5 years, 2004 to 2009. And so it's a weird feeling being back somewhere you lived for a long time, somewhere that you love, that you like once knew like the back of your hand, but so much is different. New York's changed so much the last 15 years. So it's been beautiful being here, reacquainting myself with the city. And on the work side, we had our second CPO dinner series event in New York. The first one was in San Francisco. This one was a little bit bigger. We had, I think, a total of 13 people.
It might have been 14.
14. Yeah. So we had, I think, 7 at our San Francisco dinner. This one was a little bit bigger, and it was an amazing time. We had former guests. We had new community members. We had a technology partner that was there with us. It was a lot of fun. And it's just crazy to get the feedback. And again, we had this is the last 4 events that I've done. There's been someone that has driven more than 2 hours to get to the event, which is insane to me. I mean, that's amazing. And we're humbled and honored that our community wants to come to our events, but that's a huge time investment. So anyhow, the event was awesome, and New York has been great. So that's my good news.
Did you know that the cost of replacing an employee can be as high as 2 times their annual salary? According to Gallup, that's the reality that many businesses face today. Great Place to Work has delved into this pressing issue by analyzing data from over 1.3 million employees at 2,400 plus companies across the US. Their findings are crystal clear. When employees don't experience certain key factors, they're much more likely to leave. In their 2023 workforce study, they found that 53% of workers were open to quitting. But there's good news. The report highlights the top 3 drivers for employee retention and the leadership behaviors that can keep your team happy and loyal. And it's not what you would expect. It's not ping pong tables. It's not high pay. The real drivers might surprise you. So if you're curious, I highly recommend you go download your copy of the Unlocking the Secrets of Employee Retention report. All you have to do is click the link in the show notes.
But this show's about you, Tracy, not about us. And so I called the next question our Brene Brown question. And so walk us through your story. You have an amazing background. You follow the non-traditional HR leader path. Tell us what your experience was going through the journey to become the VP of people at Wheel.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're correct. I have a very non-traditional path to the people leader seat. And I always say it took me decades to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And, I grew up in Central Florida, so spent much time in Miami. So I'm very excited about your birthday trip. I grew up really in a time where the focus was on achieve, 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 just be good at everything. And there wasn't really anyone in my life in middle school, high school, even in college, who was saying, what are you passionate about? What are your natural gifts? What is a need in the world that you want to address? There wasn't anybody having that conversation with me. It was just be good at something. And so I just tried to be good at everything and didn't have a purpose. I was undecided major at Carnegie Mellon. And, my path brought me there as an athlete and a basketball player. And so I arrived, this Florida girl who had never seen snow in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at Carnegie Mellon University, undecided major. And I would stand up to the free throw line at basketball games. And CMU is quite the nerd conference. We have, incredible schools like NYU and Brandeis and Emory in our conference. And the other students would stand behind the free throw line and heckle at you. They would chant undecided. If you were undecided, you hadn't chosen computer science or engineering or whatever your major was. And so I had a professor take an interest in my thinking style, and it was the head of the statistics department. And he said, you know what, Tracy, I think you should consider majoring in statistics. And I was like, who does that? Well, why would I do that? Many conversations later, there I was majoring in statistics and business, and really enjoyed doing that and developing my critical thinking skills. Coming out of school, still had no idea what I wanted to do. So I went to work for Accenture, which at the time, this was prior to their rebranding and split from Arthur Andersen. And so I was with Andersen Consulting, the coveted job out of school where you get to jet set around the country, work for fancy clients, and work 80 hours a week for peanuts. So that was my first job. From there, I really delved into my consulting career, starting from really technical roles like coding interfaces to shifting to strategic, the strategy practice at Deloitte. I spent some time there doing business process reengineering, and then really working on some incredible global ERP implementations like SAP, Microsoft Dynamics, at that time when global powerhouse companies were wanting to put those ERP systems in place. So I got a good taste of what it's like to navigate change, implementing business transformations through the use of technology. And I woke up one day and was like, this is interesting. Why do some of these solutions work and you see the ROI immediately? And why do some of them, despite being a well-designed, incredible system or solution, why do some of them fail miserably? I became very curious about that and realized, well, it usually boils down to the people. It really boils down to the leadership, the change management, the bringing the people along. And, saw some crazy things during my consulting years where people would just flat out rebel against, new technology or changes in process, et cetera. So that's where I became really curious and passionate about the people side of business. And then I woke up one day many years later in the HR seat, and it's been an incredible journey. I really am passionate about what I do. And if you're one of those folks out there where you still feel like you're trying to find your way and find that meaningful purpose for you, I would just encourage you to keep thinking about what are you curious about? where do you have natural gifts, and what is a need in the world that needs someone like you to help solve the problems?
Stephen, I feel like you have a lot of parallels in your career.
I totally relate to the point around not getting to college and not having flex the muscle of like what do I want? Like what goals do I have? Like I just, my father was the youngest of 12. Him and his siblings were migrant workers, and like, he didn't have any kind of visioning mentor, right, to explain to him like how you do these things. And so, they did the best they could helping me navigate my, my education, my career, but I certainly did not have that kind of guidance. It wasn't until on for me until after I got out of college and I was at Goldman, and there was a mentor who was like, Steven, like, maybe we should do some work together. And I was like, I don't know what you mean, but like, I'm in, like, whatever. Like, I always had a curiosity to be better and, like, find ways of investing in myself. And fortunately, I'm just so grateful for the people in my journey along the way that kind of stopped and they were like, hey, let's spend some time thinking about this, just because I never was exposed to that.
Oh, I love that, Stephen. In fact, I didn't know the Goldman background for you. It was one of my offers coming out of school. In fact, I remember a man in suspenders offering me a job to come work on Wall Street in New York. And I was like, I don't know if I'm a New York kind of girl, but like you, also my parents, their mindset, they each grew up in less than favorable conditions. And they were both former chief financial officers who had been the first ones in their family to go to college. It was all about survival and the American dream and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It wasn't so much, what are you passionate about? I mean, my mom got to college and she chose accounting as her major because it was the first thing on the alphabetical list. And, it was all about, I got to get out of here. I got to make something of my life. And so they provided such an amazing life for me. But that translation to what gives you meaning, like that just wasn't something that was part of the conversation.
Yeah, and I feel like now I think about the coming generations, there's just so many more options. Like I feel like there weren't as many options maybe like when y'all were, going into college. Like I feel like now you can be a creator, you can, I mean, computer science, like there's just so many more options than before. Okay, so what does Wheel do? If you're meeting somebody for the first time and you tell them you're the VP of people at Wheel and they ask you, so tell me a little bit about Wheel, what do you usually tell them?
Yeah. So it's an exciting time to be at Wheel. We are a health tech company, and Wheel is very passionate about putting great healthcare within everyone's reach. That is our vision and mission. We have created the future platform of healthcare. So we are the virtual platform, really engine behind any company that wants to get into the business of care and connecting the end patient to clinicians and care programs. We're really in an exciting moment in time where the healthcare industry, which has traditionally been quite antiquated and not come along with the rest of the world. And there are some players like us who are really wanting to be part of that transformation in moving from transactional activities of patient and doctor or clinician connections to transformation of the industry. And we are the leader of choice to do that with a lot of these non-traditional players who are starting to enter the market.
Love that. I feel like it's a space that has been just ripe for disruption for a long time. And so it's cool to hear that you guys are doing some really innovative things. And so why should Daniel and I be jealous that you get to work at Wheel?
Oh, I love that question. Well, first, I feel like my expected answer should be the people. I do. I work with incredible people at all levels of the organization, and I continue to get to know them better. And every day, I'm really, really excited to learn more about their why. and why they are at Wheel. And there's so many compelling reasons that people have joined this organization where we really are out to transform the way healthcare is provided across the world. So it's an exciting, very aspirational vision, and it's fun to be part of something like that.
Yeah, and it's super meaningful. So I had the pleasure of meeting Tracy, I think it was 3 weeks ago, could have been longer. I feel like time's just flying. But so Stephen was in Lisbon, so he couldn't make it. But I got to meet Tracy at this CPO dinner that David Hanrahan invited me to. And we got to talking, and immediately I sensed this passion around building a culture of feedback. I don't even know how this came up. Maybe we were like brainstorming topics for the show, but it just felt like there was a lot of passion on that topic. So I'm curious, like, where does that passion come from?
You are correct that I have a very deep passion for feedback in organizations. And, it comes from my journey. I have always had a deep desire to succeed, to learn and grow, to get better. And the moments in time over the last several years in my career where I've made leaps and bounds in my growth would be when people have been kind and brave enough to give me feedback, actionable feedback. But when I say that, I mean both positive feedback that maybe I didn't see something amazing in myself or didn't realize that I'm uniquely gifted at something. And someone pointed that out to me and said, no, you should go do more of that. You're really good at that. And so pointing that out from a feedback perspective, and then also, calling out the things that are my blind spots and saying, hey, this is something that you need to shift your mindset on, or that you need to find a mentor for, or really think about how you are going to shift your approach. Because those moments also of candid, constructive feedback are what help you get better. And so I view feedback as a gift. If we have feedback for others and we're not giving it, we're withholding a gift that we have to help someone become a better version of themselves.
Yeah, I believe that feedback is the lifeblood of progress. And without feedback, progress isn't impossible, but it's certainly more challenging without feedback. And so from your perspective, like, what does it mean to have a culture of feedback? Like, what does that look like in the organization? What are the traits and attributes that, at least from your view, of a company that really has nailed that feedback culture?
I love that lifeblood of progress. I'm going to use that, Stephen. I view the role of the modern people leader as really owning the performance of the organization. And that starts at the individual level. You have to have individuals performing well in order for teams to perform well, in order for the organization as a whole to maximize their performance. And that is rooted in building those one-on-one relationships that are based in trust and empathy. And if you don't have that as the building block, there's no chance for feedback to be successful.
And was feedback at some point, was there something in the data, maybe at Wheel, like maybe in the engagement surveys, that led you to say, hey, we need to work on building a culture of feedback? Or was it something that you just had personally observed, like your experience at the company? Where did the, I guess, like drive come from to say, like, hey, we really need to focus on this?
Yeah, I arrived at Wheel about a year ago. I'm coming up on my 1-year anniversary in 2 weeks, which is really exciting. And when I got to Wheel, I started building relationships with leaders at all levels of the organization. And a common theme that emerged is leaders were coming to me and complaining about other people's performance, whether it was cross-functional peers or direct reports on their own teams, and asking me what to do about it. And the first question I would always ask is, well, have you shared that feedback with that individual? And I was not too surprised, because this is something that in general in organizations we're not very good at. But the answer was oftentimes, well, I've tried, or I don't know. And so I would then investigate further. And typically, the person who needed to hear that feedback had no idea. And I was seeing a trend of leaders looking away when there was a low performer, or maybe someone wasn't meeting expectations or getting them what they needed, et cetera, where there was this avoidance. We tend as humans to avoid uncomfortable things, and giving feedback is an uncomfortable thing for a lot of people. It's not a skill that comes naturally. It's something that requires practice. It requires learning. It requires understanding the brain science behind how we receive feedback. And oftentimes people think that they've given feedback, but the other person has not heard it. They have not even realized they're being given feedback. So that was when I knew that we really needed to put a model in place that would bring us on this journey to building a feedback culture where, in addition to a performance model or tools or specific things that can put the nuts and bolts in place, but building a feedback culture means that it just becomes a way of work and part of the fiber of how you communicate regularly. It's not a moment in time where you're like, this is a feedback moment, or we do this thing twice a year. Like, it needs to be an ongoing way of working and way that you operate, essentially. And so we've been on a mission to create that at Wheel.
And so for me, I think of a lot of things when I think of feedback. And when we first started, when Daniel brought the topic of feedback, culture of feedback up, my immediate thought went to surveys because I have a bias to surveys because I ran an engagement survey company for 9 years. And so for a modern organization, and remind us, how many employees does Wheel have? Like, give us a sense for like the size of the organization.
We're at about 130.
130. So like that's a good number of employees. So what are the major components of feedback channels or whatever you want to call it, the primary methods of gathering feedback? How do you look at that for Wheel? I'm just curious.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point that is something that I want to separate and distinguish from the type of performance feedback I'm talking about. Getting feedback from employees is very important, and we do that in various ways. We do it through a monthly pulse survey. We do it through biannual employee engagement surveys. We go out and talk to people. I have regular one-on-ones with 20 leaders across Wheel, and I also spend a lot of time with individual contributors. And I also have office hours where people can come ask me anything, where they know that I welcome them just showing up, so I can get to know them and hear what's going on in their world. So again, it's all about listening and creating a culture of openness and transparency where you have an environment people feel comfortable asking the questions that are on their mind. But when I'm talking about feedback, what I mean is that manager to direct report relationship where you have a bidirectional, healthy amount of feedback where each of you knows how you're doing. Are you producing what's expected? Are you meeting expectations? Are you getting what you need from the other person? How are you working together? What needs to change? What do you need to do more of? How can you delegate things that are draining your energy? How can you do more of the things that bring you energy? Where are you thriving? Where can you stretch? Also, what are your own blind spots, and how can you have candid conversations about things that aren't going well? And that is the magic ingredient, the secret sauce for ultimately creating a high performing team, is that if you're having that kind of feedback, and that feedback needs to be informal and formal. And typically managers tend to go in one or two directions when it comes to feedback. Either they err on the side of being too timid with feedback. They don't want to hurt their employees' feelings. They're like, oh, I don't know how to tell them this because it's going to make them feel bad. And I don't want to do that. I care about them. Or they swing too far the other direction and they're too harsh and critical in their feedback. And then they also tend to forget how important the positive feedback is and saying, this is your superpower. I want to see you do more of this thing. And that's where you really get to that strengths-based, outcome. And all is about that one-on-one relationship. And a lot of times especially as we've moved more and more into the remote world and hybrid teams and distributed teams where we're working with one another digitally, the way you and I are talking today, I've noticed people have reduced the amount of time and intention that they're putting into building those relationships, because you have to build in that time to connect, to get to know, that the water cooler time that used to happen at the office, right? Where you're in the kitchen and you're grabbing the water and you're chatting about your dog, your kids, you're going mountain biking this weekend, you're like getting to know one another. And in a digital remote world, you have to be intentional about building that time in. It is table stakes to be able to have those feedback conversations. And then the feedback conversations, there is no magic tool or model that results in having that culture. It really boils down to teaching your leaders how to give feedback, your leaders being committed personally to doing it and seeing how important it is. And then also coming full circle and helping your employees learn how to receive feedback well. A lot of companies skip that part. You have to teach your employees how to receive feedback. Everyone needs to be a good feedback receiver. And if you're not getting the feedback you need, you should feel empowered to ask for it. You should feel empowered to say, hey, Daniel, let's say you're my manager. How am I doing? Tell me something that I'm doing really well that you would like to see me do more of. Tell me something that is not going well and your perspective on why it's not going well. And then I'd love to be able to share with you my perspective and what I need from you to unblock me in this area. Like, we have to be committed to those conversations. And there's no magic, tool or vendor or whatever that can make that happen.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple of questions, but one thing that comes to mind, I've found that part of like building this culture of feedback, it really does start from the top and role modeling those behaviors. So if I have a manager that at the end of every one-on-one is saying, hey, Daniel, do you have any feedback for me? Like, is there anything that I could be doing better? Sorry if this week I like almost giving like self feedback first. Like this week I felt like I could have, helped you out more with this. I could have, better communicated some of the decisions that are coming from senior leadership to you and the rest of the team. Like, how do you feel about how I delivered that message? Like little things like that make the person feel more comfortable to like give you feedback as a manager, but then also are more open about like the feedback that they would give themselves and are open to feedback from their managers because it's a two-way street. It's just hard to kind of, I don't know, build like cadences and rhythms within the organization or like the way that the company operates to where that's happening every single time that there's a one-on-one. And one thing you mentioned when we last met is that you're trying to rethink the one-on-one. So as you said, there's no like silver bullet template for how to do a one-on-one or tool that's going to solve all of your problems. But at Wheel, how are y'all thinking about the one-on-one? Like, how are you training managers to conduct these one-on-ones? What like rituals, if any, are built into these one-on-ones to get that feedback going both ways?
Yeah, one thing that we started doing at the end of last year was taking an existing ritual, the one-on-one, and rethinking it so that it can become a mechanism for feedback. So, we trained on feedback. We trained our leaders how to give feedback. But then it's like, well, when, how, and where are we expecting them to do this? So we created a template for the one-on-one that we expect all of our leaders to use. And in that template includes a component that we're calling the feedback journal. So we've killed the annual review, and it's so antiquated and should be put 6 feet under permanently. And we have a feedback section in the one-on-one document that people are expected to have a one-on-one agenda. They typically make it more status-based. Here are the things I've accomplished. This is what I'm working on. These are the questions I need. These are the decisions we have to make. And shifting, of course, those things need to occur in a one-on-one, but we're asking leaders to spend and carve off time at minimum every other one-on-one. So like once a month, where you are having a focused feedback discussion. And that's bi-directional. Like you mentioned, Daniel, I always make sure to coach leaders and also for myself to model this, to pull feedback up and to say, are you getting what you need from me? How am I doing as your manager? What is something that I need to do better for you? How can I unlock your potential? How can I unblock you? Am I giving you effective feedback? Do you know how you're doing? From my perspective. And so we've built that in to the one-on-one, and we're really seeing a lot of exciting progress with that. We have leaders who are utilizing that. And then we're also holding them accountable, right? By making sure we're reaching out to leaders and saying, are you doing this? The other key part of that feedback journal and one-on-one is that we have made it very clear and done a company-wide training that the one-on-one is not owned by the manager. The direct report owns the one-on-one. So if I report to you, Stephen, when it's time for our one-on-one, I should prepare the agenda. I should be ready to give you feedback, and I should expect that you're going to give me feedback. And if I'm not getting feedback from you, I own my own career journey, and I am the biggest player in carving out my path. And so I should be asking you for feedback if I'm not getting it. And so we're creating this, ownership mentality also for our individuals and the direct reports. You're the owner of your journey, and you should be asking your manager for what you need. So framing it that way is also something that we've focused on.
I love that. I'm a big believer. In fact, Daniel and I have talked about this a lot on the show, that too much has been put on the manager's shoulders. Just generally speaking, obviously not a wheel, just in a general sense that it's never been harder to be a manager than it is today, because of all of it's just such a critical role, and there's so many high expectations of managers. And now with remote work, you also have to be an EQ expert, and you have to be an active listener, and you have to there are all these must have qualities of managers that I feel just, it wasn't at the forefront of our thinking 10 years ago. And so the fact that you're putting the onus on, as much of the onus on your individual contributors or your employees as the managers, I think is great. Because at the end of the day, we do all own our own experiences, and we do have control. There's so many things you don't have control over as an employee, but that's one thing you actually do have control over, is the ability to own your own experience. So I love that value you guys have. And so how have you're a change manager, right? That's one of the things that I heard in your journey is enacting change, implementing change, influencing change. And so what was your game plan? And, when you realize, okay, we don't have the culture that I believe we should have, that we need to, if we want to have high performance culture, we need to encourage more feedback. So what was the change plan? How did you go about ensuring that it was clear to everyone what a culture of feedback meant, and how exactly what the future would look like, how things would be different?
Oh yeah, I love that question. Well, first I should be clear that we still have work to do. This is not something that you implement, you carve out a plan, you implement, and then all is well, and you don't have to continue to come back to it. Building a true feedback culture is an ongoing journey, and we will continuously be working on this as an organization. But the change plan, really, the first key in any successful change in terms of human behavior change, is creating an awareness of the need for the change. That's the first step. If you want to get your grandmother to stop smoking, you walk up to her and hand her a pamphlet and a nicotine patch, and here's how to do it. That is not going to work, right? Because maybe she isn't even aware of why should she consider stopping smoking. Like, you're skipping that part. So building that awareness, why is this important? Why do we need to change? And being able to point out the negative outcomes or the pain points we're all experiencing as an organization in our culture. How are those holding us back as an organization? So creating that awareness first, and along with that, the desire to change at the individual level, because you can't just tell people to change. That just does not work. So once you build that awareness and desire, then you can move into the knowledge and ability for how to change. And that's where, training and accountability and continuous reinforcement comes in. But a lot of times I see in any type of change that is happening across an organization, the leaders of the change skip that awareness and desire piece and go straight to the training. And that's a huge mistake, because people will always revert back to old behaviors if that's the approach.
And so, speaking of change, you also mentioned that you'd like to shift away from annual performance reviews. So are you currently like in the awareness phase, like trying to create awareness in the company that maybe this isn't the perfect system? Like, tell us more about where you are with that.
Yeah. I mean, I've had some moments in meetings where I cringe a little bit before I say, we're not doing annual reviews. And then you just wait, you're just like, wait for a tomato to be thrown at you or something. Most people are thrilled that we're doing that. And some people still, it's almost like you have to hear it 7 times before you really get it. Like, wait, we're doing what? When's my review? Like, it's not happening. It is such a shift in mindset from, a certain time of year, I get this very formal piece of paper, right, that has my review on it, versus you should be getting your review continuously. And we're building the annual review through the feedback journals. And let me tell you, this is not an easy change to implement. There is a lot of resistance. It's not negative resistance. It's more like people are just
It's brand
wrapping
new.
their head around it,
Yeah.
right?
Why do you think that is? Like, if you have worked at a company long enough to do more than a couple of performance review cycles,
Yeah.
I would bet that the majority dislike the fact that you have to like spend hours to get this process done. Like, literally nobody enjoys that. No one loves doing performance reviews. And so it's a surprise to me. It's a bit of a blind spot that you would go to your people and say, hey, I've got great news. No more performance reviews. And the first thing that happens is you're met with resistance. Like, oh, well, when's my review going to be? Like, what do you think that is? Is that just like we adopt what we've come to expect? Or like, how can we literally hate performance reviews, but be almost dependent on them is kind of like what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Well, it's very normal human behavior to hold on to something that's familiar. And we feel sometimes unsafe if we're not able to hold on to these things that make us feel safe, because it's the way I've always received information about how I'm doing and my performance. And so taking that away and replacing it with something else feels scary, and there's just going to be a natural resistance to it. That being said, I am really encouraged with where we are in the journey, because we're seeing a lot of adoption of our new way of providing feedback. And, I'm seeing some beautiful outcomes. I had on our product team, I had a leader and a direct report, a high potential leader on that team, who each were coming to me separately. And we had the manager who was like, I really want to do this well. I want to provide this person with feedback. They're so high potential. There's some blind spots, some areas they need to grow, but I don't know if I'm getting across, and help me practice this conversation. It is important to me. And then we have the direct report coming to me and saying, I'm just not getting any feedback from my manager. I keep asking, I'm not getting the feedback. And so there was this miss that was happening where they weren't connecting. And as I provided each of them with coaching around how to have that conversation more effectively, then literally a month later, I checked in with each of them and they're like, it's going great. They're totally in the zone. We're seeing incredible outcomes. We're seeing this employee really feel empowered and excited about her career journey. The manager is getting better and feeling more comfortable. And so we're really approaching it as this dual learning, right? We had an all company training where we said, hey, everyone, I want you to know we trained all your leaders on how to give feedback, but now we're going to train you also, because you need to be good at receiving feedback and asking for feedback. And we're all in this together. This is not a one-way street. There are two people in this relationship, right? The manager direct report, as you mentioned, it can't be all on the manager. There are two people in the relationship, and they both have an equally important role in creating that beautiful working relationship.
I'm glad you brought up training. I feel like for a lot of companies, training, it's like a once and done exercise. It's like
Yeah.
like a literally a one-off. Here's how to do like feedback 101, and then everyone is magically supposed to be prepared to like deliver and receive feedback. And so for you, what are like the most important components of feedback training? Like what does that encompass at Wheel or in, Tracy's kind of playbook, HR playbook? What does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, the training piece is important, and building training that is based in brain science and that has an actionable formula is something that is really important too. It can't be this pie in the sky theoretical feedback's great, you should give it. It needs to be actionable and have easy to follow steps. But then following up with that is providing the ongoing support is also really key. So all of the leaders across Wheel, including all of our individual contributors, they know that my door is open if they want to practice giving feedback with me before they give it to an employee. Many of them will do that. They'll reach out to me and say, hey, I want to practice this conversation. Am I doing the right things? Am I preparing them for the feedback? Am I giving the data points? And am I sharing the impacts? Am I asking their perspective? Let's make sure I have this conversation. I'd like to practice. So that's key, is providing that ongoing support in the learning process. And then the second is in holding leaders accountable and knocking on their door and saying, hey, Daniel, are you and Steven having feedback conversations? Just checking in. Can I see your one-on-one document? Can you share it with me so I can see that you're actually documenting the feedback as well? And, just holding people accountable and doing that, even if you're at an organization like mine where we are not large enough to have HR business partners. And so we've got to be scrappy. And so I serve as the HR business partner to all of our directors and above and some senior managers in the organization. And my incredible senior people operations manager has been really open to learning and growing in that area. And she is serving that role in addition to owning our HRIS and data and onboarding and benefits and all the nuts and bolts that an HR ops, people ops person would do. She's really stretching and growing into providing that one-on-one HRBP support to our really critical frontline managers.
So I want to go back briefly to this idea of the feedback journal and how you're totally scrapping the annual performance review. I feel like a big fear for a lot of employees at least this would be my fear is like, oh, like if we're scrapping the annual performance review, how am I gonna know like what I'm labeled as? Like, I don't know what I guess like there's probably a lot of different scales, like exceeding expectations to I don't know what the lowest rating would be, and you're only allowed to give like 3 people the highest rating. Are y'all totally scrapping that as well? Or are you, yeah, what are y'all doing there?
Yeah, no, we are not scrapping that component altogether. What we've implemented from that perspective is a performance map. Our performance map is essentially a 9 box. I'm sure everyone listening to this episode knows what that is. Where you have the performance axis on the x-axis, and on the y-axis is potential. And then, you have an outcome there of where someone is performing. And that's essentially our rating system. And we're calling it a performance map instead of a 9 box, because I believe that you should not ever put someone in a box at a moment of time and then they feel stuck there. We are all on a career journey. And if you're brand new in your role, you're not going to be necessarily a high performer or a superstar at the beginning. You might be a core player, you might be just meeting expectations, right? And not have potential at the next level yet. You're brand new in your level. And so we are doing that twice a year in association with our promotion cycles. But we're being transparent about it. We are talking about it as part of a journey. And it is a key component in how we are looking at our employees and their performance, but it's not the focus. It's just a component in the overall model.
And so if I'm understanding your philosophy of sorts correctly, there's no longer a need for a performance review conversation, because those should be happening weekly, like all the time. That should be like organically happening on a recurring, ongoing basis with a structure that will ensure that the right types of conversations are having. And from a rating perspective, there isn't a single number you're getting, but rather we're referencing a performance map to kind of reevaluate where you're at in your performance map or your journey as an employee. And both of those things are now, like, rather than point in time exercises, these are like ongoing, more organic processes that we are revisiting periodically.
Yes. And we are doing the performance map exercise at points in time with leaders, but we are expecting that feedback to be happening continuously. And the annual review is just changing the way it looks. So I say
Right.
we're killing it, but really it's just changing it.
Right.
So instead of once a year, you sit down as a leader, and everybody hates the month of September because you have to sit there and spend hours and hours and hours thinking up everything that your employee did the last 3 to 6 months or year, where they need to improve, all those things. If you're doing that continuously, you're building the annual review throughout the year. And then it's right there for you. It's right there for you in your one-on-one feedback journal.
I love this. And so the next piece for me is, okay, how does this relate to my compensation?
That was where I was going with that. Yeah.
I want my rating, I want my number, because I know that there's this thing called comp ratio, or this multiplier that ties back to my performance rating. And so I want to, at the end of all this, show me the money. Like, how is this impacting my compensation? I feel like that's how a modern employee thinks. And so I'm just curious, like, how does this play into that final piece of pay? And, or does it not? Like, is that like a totally separate process? But how do for me, that last piece is important, because that's how you make sense of it. Like, I'm guessing there may be a new way of looking at compensation that you may have recently rolled out, or a different approach. So I'm just curious on your thoughts there.
Yes. That is the money-making question. Yes, everyone wants to know how it ties to compensation.
Show me the money.
Exactly. We spent 6 to 9 months rolling out pay transparency, and we achieved that in March of this year. That journey was really intense because we started with making sure that our employees were leveled correctly. And then we went from there and we used PAVE as our compensation partner to do a really in-depth market study and to make sure that we were defining our compensation philosophy and strategy at Wheel so that you can't be transparent about a philosophy and strategy that isn't well defined. So that's the first step there, is getting alignment and strong definition around that. That includes building your pay bands aligned with a philosophy. And then the strategy piece is, how do you apply that philosophy? Are moving people through their career journey, you're also moving them through their pay band in alignment with your compensation strategy. So identifying that we wanted to target the 75th percentile to the market, then building our bands, and then defining that strategy around how do you move people through those bands. So now, as of March, all of our employees have visibility into their pay band, and they know their comp ratio. They know where they sit in their band. And that does tie back to those conversations that leaders are having with individuals around their performance, and how is your journey in your performance also aligning with your journey through your pay band and your ultimate journey to the next level or promotion. So we are all ultimately wrapping that all together with a bow. It has to all come together at some point. So that's something that we started to do in March of this year. And it's a continuous, how do we make this better? But again, it really comes back to those ongoing conversations.
Yeah, and I can see the power of the messaging to an employee. Like, forget about the number, like forget about your rating, right? That we're looking at this totally different, and to show you our commitment, like we're also taking a different approach regarding pay transparency. I've often wondered like how, part of the problem of making that leap is like this psychological like tie of my rating to what I'm going to get. And so I love that you guys are also radically thinking different about your comp approach.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's time for rapid fire questions. We somehow always, speed through the 60 minutes of the episode, but it is now that time for rapid fire questions. So we ask the same 3 questions to every guest. And question 1 is, how do you define a modern people leader? What are the traits and characteristics?
A modern people leader is someone who really is on a mission to create the HR function to be the strategic engine for the performance of the business, and is moving away from the idea that HR is a nuts and bolts cost center.
Love that.
Oh, and the characteristics, a modern people leader is tenacious, possesses a lot of business acumen, and radically cares about the individuals at the company.
Yes. Love that. Love that. If you could go back in time and talk to a 22-year-old you, what career advice would you give yourself and why?
Oh, I would tell the 22-year-old version of me to listen, Tracy, listen to your intuition, trust that, and be unapologetically your unique self. Do not listen to who other people say you should be. Don't do it. Just be your unique self.
That's great advice. And last rapid fire question. If you could fix any HR or people problem with a magic wand, what would it be and why?
I would wave the magic wand and create cross-functional harmony and empathy.
Ooh, I for some reason I just had like a vision of the Smurfs triumph against Gargamel, and they're like cheering.
I'm not familiar.
Oh my God, you have to YouTube Smurfs. So that gets us to our one final question, which is how we've been able to get so many guests. You were recommended to the show by David Hanrahan. We brought a lot of our great guests, have been referred through previous guests. And the question is like, who should we bring onto the show next? Like, who is a professional out there that you feel must be heard?
Caitlin Clark.
Caitlin Clark. Caitlin,
Yes. I'm throwing you off with my
Yes.
answer, guys.
I don't know. I mean, we're loving your answer. We're not like you. We rarely are surprised on this show with this question, but you genuinely.
Maybe there's a CPO named Caitlin Clark that I don't know about. We
No,
would
the
love to have
basketball
Caitlin
player.
Clark on the show. That's a great suggestion.
That is.
Okay. We are on to the last tradition of the show, and that's one word or phrase close. So you can respond with one word or a few, anything that comes to mind. It could be your way of putting a bow on the show.
Do I have to go first or can I hear yours first?
You can hear out. If you need time, you want to hear it. If I have one ready to go. If I'm just gonna go. I feel like a common theme to this episode has been change. And, it's always a good reminder and good to acknowledge that change is hard. Kudos to you in the spirit of having a culture of feedback. Kudos to you, Tracy, for like pushing for change at your company and getting all these like really amazing programs in place because it's freaking hard. Change is hard.
Do you want me to go next? I can go next. I'm going to say start your feedback journal.
I like it. I would say after this conversation and also having the pleasure of meeting each of you in person at different moments in time this year that I am feeling inspired.
Love it. Love it. I'm feeling inspired also. I took so many notes. Like usually Daniel and I have an asynchronous document that we're working on in the background during these conversations. When we're together like this, it kind of throws us out of our rhythm because we can't do that. But I was furiously taking old school notes over here because there's just so many cool things that you're working on. And so thank you for carving out time to join us. I know you've had a busy week and a lot of things going on. So we really do appreciate it.
Well, it was my absolute pleasure to be a guest on the show. I've been a fan for quite some time. I love putting on the podcast when I'm, going on a hike or doing my dog walk in the evenings, and just really love all the incredible content you're curating, and am a true believer that we have to, if we're really going to transform the HR function into the modern people leader, we have to be continuously learning from one another.
Yeah. And what I loved about today's episode is that even though change is hard, I feel like you provided like a few simple, actionable steps that companies can take to rethink feedback, rethink performance. I don't know. I feel like this is pretty eye-opening for me. Like I think I do learn something on every episode, but there are a few episodes where I'm like, like I am going to be thinking about this for a while. So thank you so much for joining us. That was a lot of fun.
Thanks, guys. Hope to do it
Alrighty.
again soon.
Yeah,
For sure.
Bye.